I just got back from church. I walked there and back. I'm not going to make a habit of it. It was a research trip. But here, I'm going to chair. Um, might have been a badly timed research trip. It wasn't your average uh, service, I assume, because it seems to be a service all about what the children are doing, usually in Sunday school, when the parents are having a service. The children, big choir of tons of children, and that's not a Mormon joke. There were a lot of children. Um, uh, they sang, and then some of them came forward and uh, read prepared statements about their faith and how it affects their lives. Um, it was pretty good, but it was called the primary presentation. Perhaps because the kids were all primary school age. Um, I went because a chapter of a book that I'm going to rewrite takes place during a Mormon service, and I had never been to a Mormon service. I'd been to the Ilkamora pageant. That's not the same thing. It's probably better, and I don't know for sure yet because this was not your average service. However, probably a primary presentation would be more interesting to write about in a novel than the average service. So I think I'm going to go with that. Um, the they did the sacrament thing that a lot of churches do. I haven't been to a church service in more than 10 years. I don't count weddings. And the sacrament, and I was the only male there without a tie. At least the only one over, I will say, 5. There are some younger than 5-year-olds without a tie. I don't know why I didn't see that coming. I don't know if it would have influenced my decision for what to wear, but I just, for some reason, did not anticipate being the only guy there without a tie. So yeah, it would probably be a good chapter. The sacraments, they brought it out. They didn't. It wasn't a thing where, as I've seen before, mostly I guess at Catholic services, where the people stand up and then they file to the head of the room and they kneel down in a semicircle and they have the wafer and the wine given to them. The young boys in ties came out and they each had a little basket, a silver basket, and some of them, first they weren't wafers, they looked more like pieces of cake, but they were probably just very nice bread. And I went like this, I said, it's okay. When it came to be my turn, I didn't partake. And then they brought water, little cups of water instead of little cups of wine. Because, and again, why didn't I see this coming? I guess I didn't give this a lot of thought because I was going more to learn than to experience something that I already knew everything about. Mormons don't do alcohol, which neither do I, which is not why I would have turned it down even if it were a little cup of wine. But the water, see, that's why I had to go. It's possible that in the first iteration of this story that I was telling, this novel, I wrote it and I didn't get anywhere with it. And now I see all sorts of flaws with it and reasons to completely scrap it. It's fine, but I can do better, and I'd rather do better from scratch now that I've written more things. But I probably had the Mormons drinking wine in that novel because I didn't know any better, because I've been to Lutheran and Catholic services. So there was that. And there wasn't really a sermon or anything like that, which was disappointing for a number of reasons. But again, that just means I don't have to make up a sermon for the novel. I could just describe primary presentation. I got to look it up and find out if I'm right about that's what the kids are learning in Sunday school. Probably that is the case, and I've got to look it up and find out if it has to be in the middle of November, because that does affect the timing of other events in the novel. But yeah, it was good. I got some ideas. They have a reputation for being so friendly. None of them came up and talked to the stranger without a tie. Maybe it was because I didn't have a tie. Maybe it was because none of them knew me. Maybe it was because they were all so focused on all the children running around, and there were tons of children on stage, and there were a lot of children running around in the aisles, which is again one, not a joke about Mormons and all of their children. This was the reality of what I just experienced, and also probably again not your average service. Probably there are usually not a lot of children at the service. They're probably usually in various. There were a bunch of other rooms on that level. It was the Lincoln Square Temple. There are a bunch of other little rooms. Probably children are in Sunday school. But anyway, I wanted to start, and I will get to what the title says I'm going to talk about soon. But I wanted to start with a reading from the Book of Mormon. I brought this in case anyone offered me one, because they do that sometimes. I've stopped and talked to them outside the temple. The legal adults who, to me, look like children who wait on the corner of Broadway and 65th to convert you. I've talked to them in the past, let them practice their spiel on me. Book of Jacob, chapter 4, verse 1, I guess. Now behold, it came to pass that I, Jacob, having ministered much unto my people in word, and I cannot write but a little of my words, because of the difficulty of engraving our words upon plates, and we know that the things which we write upon plates must remain. Now right there, no truer words ever written in a religious text, any religious text, Dianetics, the Bible, the Quran. Who among you can argue that it is difficult to write words on metal plates? That's the sermon for the day. I'm going to start with this. It's not up yet, but check Onstage Blog or Onstage Blog's Facebook page or my Facebook page, because I wrote last night, something occurred to me, and I wrote it down and I sent it to Onstage Blog. It should be published at some point. This past week, Disney Plus launched, and as I've mentioned here before, I've been collecting Disney DVDs and now Disney adjacent DVDs like Star Wars and Marvel DVDs. Not a lot of Marvel, but and actually I already had all of the X-Men that I want, so that I don't have to get Disney Plus in order to see these things again. I want to be able to see Aladdin or the Pirates of the Caribbean movies whenever I want. So Disney Plus happened. Things happened. I posted a joke on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram where I lined up all of my Disney, Marvel, and whatever else DVDs on this table that's currently out, that I've got the computer on, and took a picture so that it looks kind of like the Disney Plus screen with all the movie icons, all the different movies. That happened, and then in the middle of the week, my screen has gone to its screensaver, and so I gotta tap the space bar. I've given up on trying to make it not do that, but I try not to let it interrupt. A little later in the week, Netflix announced that it would be teaming up with Nickelodeon, and this was talked about on Screen Junkies, which is where I get such news, and they talked about all the things that they would like to see, the Nicktoons, the live-action shows, Pete and Pete, that sort of thing. And it didn't occur to me until last night that, oh, wait a second, Nickelodeon, where they had the Animorphs show that happened, is teaming up with Netflix, which all the people who are calling for an Animorphs TV show reboot say it should be on Netflix, including me. Could this be in the realm of possibility now that Netflix and Nickelodeon have teamed up? So I'm joined today by Rachel Bear. Here we go. There she is. There's Rachel. There's the bear. There's Rachel. Try to keep her face out of front of my face. I knew I was going to record this today because I wanted to do twice a month rather than once a month. Hopefully they'll be shorter, these videos. I didn't know that I was going to have a perfectly legitimate excuse to wave one of the lenticular covers like this in front. I enjoy doing this. So I wrote last night. There's more room on this side. I wrote last night. See, it's different. It's like, for me, it's like looking in a mirror, but reverse. So not like looking in a mirror. So I'm looking at it's on that side from what I can see of the screen. But anyway, Um, I just, said a bunch of things that I've said before, that special effects technology, developments lately in special effects technology from photorealistic animals like in The Lion King to motion capture like in just about everything nowadays, it's been evolving to the point where it's all been getting here for Animorphs specifically. It's created the perfect environment for Animorphs. I wrote that Animorphs is Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, Star Wars, and Avengers all rolled into one. I said a lot of things. How it's got an environmentalist message. It's got important things to say about war. It supplied trans kids in the 90s, before being trans was more widely accepted, like it is now. It's not totally accepted now, but it is more widely accepted. Gave them a little taste of representation in the character of Tobias. And so I just wrote all of that. That should appear on Stage Blog, but if it doesn't happen, then that's not the worst thing in the world. But it does feel kind of like audiobooks and graphic novels are in the works, according to Michael Grant, who co-wrote the books and co-created the series with Catherine Applegate. And they seem to be working on another kind of show based on one of his other book series. I don't know much about that. But it seems like the planets are aligning for an Animorphs series. And as I often wrote in my Animorphs blog posts, and probably said once or twice on here, I'd love to be involved in some way. That's probably not going to happen if it happens soon, but I'd still like for it to happen soon. They're great books, great stories, lots for them to offer the culture, and J.J. Abrams can have it, just as long as it happens and it happens well. Another I wrote the thing that I mentioned before about how it might be best if we stop using honorifics like Mr., Ms., Mrs., etc. And so that I'll link to, because I hadn't written that when I talked about it before. And I want to talk about this little card. Bring this card to the polls to skip the information table. How many of you did that? I don't know if this happens outside of New York City. Hopefully, if it's only in New York City, I don't recall getting them when I was voting upstate. These are probably the future. The site that I'm not showing you has an identification number and a barcode that the people at poll sites have readers. They have tablets that can read the barcode and find all of your voter information. If you're sent one of these, it's not a voter ID card. It is a registration. It's a registration card. It's not. You can't use it to prove your identity legally, but you take it to the polls, and it makes it easier for them to find. See, we used to have, and I work at poll sites. That's why I'm passionate about this. You used to have thick books with addresses and names and signatures, and now it's the tablets that read the cards, and they get your voter information much more easily than us trying to understand every single person who comes through, not all of whom speak the same language we do, whatever language that is. So it's not always easy for us to, and I wasn't working at a table, I was working with the scanners this time around. It's not always easy for us to find people that old-fashioned way in the book. This makes it easier. Not everybody brings it, but since we have those readers now, it's a little bit more important to bring it and more helpful to bring it. It's not necessary to bring it because we can still look you up. But we ask now because it is so convenient and easy. But when we asked, and the people who were working the table, they knew perfectly well when you do these things, you're not allowed to ask for an ID unless it specifically says to ask for an ID for a specific person, because legally you don't need an ID to vote. You just need to be registered in the district. And if you are registered, this should come to you automatically. Again, I don't know, maybe I should have looked it up if these cards happen elsewhere in the country. But in New York City, they definitely do. But people thought they were being asked for an ID, which we're not supposed to do. And they called the Board of Elections and complained, but we weren't. I wasn't working at the table, but I could hear every interaction at the table. It was very close. It was a small room. So the next morning, I wrote to the Board of Elections and I said, you have so many posters that explain to people how to vote this or that aspect of voting. Make one that's a blow up of this card that the person at the table can just point to. We'll put it up right behind the table and they can point to it and say, did you bring that? Because it's not an ID. It's then easy to know that they're not being asked for an ID, which is not okay. If you're asked for an ID, you'll know what's being asked for, and they can explain it, and it could have little explanations on the thing. People will learn. When we work at poll sites, we go through training. Voters do not go through poll site training, so they just we have to guide them, and they shouldn't have to. But again, there's a lot of educational materials on the walls at your poll site. You probably ignore them because you don't need them. You just go to the table. It's a fairly easy process for most people, except for certain places in the country, which is a completely different conversation than this, except maybe they are related. So anyway, I wrote to the Board of Elections. I said, make this poster, and it will help as we move toward this new and better way of getting people voting. So now, just a few books to talk about, and hopefully this will be. Let's see how. Okay, it's 16 minutes. I'm going to try to keep this under a half hour. This book, Amanda Cross, not her real name. Death in a Tenured Position, not to be confused with Death in an Adjunct Position, which may or may not be a book yet, but is a completely different problem. This is a mystery novel. I think the last that I still have, other than the Da Vinci Code, because it was the hot mystery novel at the time, this is the last that I still have from when I took a class on mystery novels. That's how I accidentally stumbled into becoming a women's studies minor. It was a murder mystery class. And this was the most interesting for a couple of reasons. The main reason it stuck around was because I got the impression that it was very rare. And I guess it is rare compared to, say, the Dan Brown or Michael Crichton books, which there are infinite numbers of those in the world. My dad and I, when we went around to used book places, we could find every book that I needed pretty much except for this one. This one I had to get at the Sundance bookstore at SUNY Geneseo. So I had the impression that it was rarer and more worth keeping around than it probably actually is. So I am going to get rid of it now that I've reread it. I'm going to sell it. And it's the thing to point out about this book, written in the 70s, published in the early 80s. Let me confirm that. Copyright 1981. It's less about the death and the investigation into the death than how certain attitudes about certain kinds of people can lead to awful things happening. You don't have to be all the way to murderer in order to be the cause of tragedies. If you treat certain kinds of people a certain kind of way. I could just not have screensavers happen, but I like to, screensavers, most people don't have screensavers anymore. They just let the thing go to sleep. And that might be easier, but I like the screensavers. Anyway, I will miss the book, but it's not something that I can see myself rereading over and over again, like, say, an Animorphs book. I will probably pick up more of her books, and I don't know, her actual name is on my blog post, which is linked to below. If I find more Amanda Cross books, I'll say, then I'll probably look into them. If you find this book, I highly recommend it. It's a very interesting book. It's short, not easy per se. A lot of debate, discussion, rather than action that you'd expect in a, like one of those books that I read by Dashiell Hammett. And debates that are still happening 40 years after this book was published, approximately 40 years after this book was published, mostly to do with the various waves of feminism. Speaking of feminism, first ever Nancy Drew book, which I read at the same time as I watched my second ever Nancy Drew movie. I had previously watched the Emma Roberts Nancy Drew movie, and this time I watched the Sophia Lillis, I think that's her name, Nancy Drew movie produced by Ellen DeGeneres, who I know that's her name. It's The Ghost of Blackwood Hall, and that's why I picked it. I think there were a few, but The Ghost of Blackwood Hall, that's a title that I can really get interested in. And I also want to point out not the stem, the spine. You can see that somewhere along, this is probably an old book, very old, and the history of the book is in the blog post about the book, which is called Nancy Ploy. The spine is clearly damaged. And somebody, I don't know if it was the library where the book lived in New Jersey, or an owner who brought it up to East Rochester, which is where I found it, somewhere along the line, someone inserted this paper here. It doesn't seem to be part of the actual book. It seems to be an addition to the structure of the book, and then colored it in and added the patterns to make it look whole again. And I think that that is adorable, and it is one reason I considered keeping the book. I have my stack of, which you can't see, and the camera won't move, and I'm not going to move it, but I have a stack of classic old-looking hardcover type books, and I considered keeping and adding this book to it, but I didn't. Won't say much about the plot, other than it was remarkably similar to the Sophia Lillis Nancy Drew movie, because more what I want to talk about is this was just a fun, nice, fun, comfort read, it reminded me of reading Sherlock Holmes. It's not a challenging book, maybe it was back then, although the most challenging thing about it may have been a female protagonist with so much agency. But it's just a nice, relatively easy read. It feels great to read a book like this with the cover, with this texture, kind of fabric-y, and pages this thick, which is not how pages feel these days, for the most part, and they're a little bit yellow. It's just really nice to read a book like this, and the story was fun too. And before I do the last book, I just want to make sure that I get in this story. This was fun. Now, I went to church today. I don't believe in God. I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in karma. I don't believe in mystical rewards for certain behaviors. But on the way back, I'm walking up Central Park West, and about 72nd Street, I found 3 bright, shiny, new $5 bills just lying there. And people were walking around, and I asked a few couples, is this yours? Is this yours? Not necessarily showing them, but saying, did you drop cash? And nobody had. And so I'm thinking, oh, well, this is between 5 and 15 new used DVDs from the library sale. And I'm walking up, and again, I want to emphasize, I don't believe in karmic rewards or God saying, oh, Aaron went to church today. I think I should reward him for that. What's the minimum wage in New York State? $11? No, that's not nearly enough. It should be 15. And he spent an hour, 15 an hour. I'll give him 15. I don't believe in that. And in this particular case, I was right, because at 73rd Street, a woman comes up to me and she says that she had dropped some money, and I had not yet put it away. And so I said, with 3 5s, and she said yes, and I handed it back to her. And I don't know for a fact that she didn't just see me pick it up and decide she was going to pretend it was hers. But the look on her face, the tone of her voice, I think that she was being perfectly honest with me. So again, there was no the time that I was walking in that same area late at night, and I found $55 cash, and it was nobody's. Nobody came up claiming it, and I asked around to the few people who were out with me at that time. I hadn't been to church that day. I hadn't been to church in 10 years at that time. So it's a pretty big argument in favor of not going to church. More earthly rewards in not going to church, at least if we're going to play that game, which I don't have to play that game. I just want to point that out. Only one last book, and kind of about church, about a mission. Santa Barbara mission, Zia. Now it says up here that Zia is the sequel to the classic Island of the Blue Dolphins, but if you're just reading the book for the majority of the book, you wouldn't know that, other than the occasional mention of Karana, which is the name that Scott Odell gave to the lone woman of San Nicolas Island. She was a real person, not Zia. Zia was a fake person, which is a weird thing to anchor a sequel to essentially a true story. Nobody knows the lone woman's name. She was called Juana Maria when she was rescued and taken to Santa Barbara Mission. And Zia is supposed to be her niece. And there are so many problems with the premise of this book. If Zia exists, one of the problems that the lone woman, I'll call her the lone woman, encountered at Santa Barbara Mission was, whereas 20 years earlier, 18 years earlier, her people had been mostly taken from the island because they were under threat on the island, and so they were rescued and taken to the mainland, or to Santa Barbara Mission, and they were all gone by the time she got there. Died or moved away. Nobody could communicate with her. Nobody knew her language, if she still even knew her language, from not having talked to anybody for so long. If she has a niece who was connected, and the niece has family somewhere off, then there's a connection. And why not just take her there? It does accurately portray, again, as far as is known, the history of the lone woman when she lived at the Santa Barbara Mission, except there's that issue of, whereas she had no way to communicate with anybody in real life, theoretically there was a way for her to get to more people who might have understood her, and no effort was made. Secondly, she was rescued by a man named George Nidifer. And the back of the book says that Zia has dreamt of going to the island of the Blue Dolphins to find her Aunt Karana, and she attempts it. And I thought that, even though I know historically it's not how it happened, I wrote about it for Atlas Obscura. I'll link to that below. There's some great pictures. Not my pictures, but they're great. Zia tries, but I know that she's not going to do it. I know that the title character, the protagonist, is not going to do the defining thing in the plot. And so what I wrote about this book on my blog is that it's probably an okay book. It's probably a very good book for young people to read. Scott Odell, not a Native American. I don't think that disqualifies him from telling the story of the lone woman. But since it's selling itself as a sequel to Island of the Blue Dolphins, and since on the back it's all about Karana's return and the issues that she faces, the fact that 3/4 of the book are not about her, even if they have interesting, historically significant things that did happen to Native Americans at Santa Barbara Mission and at missions like it, for me, because that's what I wanted and that's what I expected, it was not a good book. It's probably a good book for most people. It's probably a good educational book for people for whom it's for. This is a middle grade book. I'm not a middle grade person, but I have liked middle grade books. Animorphs is essentially middle grade. Island of the Blue Dolphins is middle grade. It's one of my favorite books. So it's probably a fine book. I had personal problems with it because of what I wanted from it. That doesn't say that it's bad for the book. It just says that it's not a book for me. So I will link. I don't know how long it's going to take to upload. Okay, we're almost at a half hour, and I'll end this soon. Hopefully, I can link to what I wrote about Animorphs for On-Screen blog when I upload this to YouTube. But I don't know. I will eventually do it. I'm going to try to do this twice a month to make it shorter, and I will probably not go to church again for a long time. Although maybe if the opportunity presents itself, I'll go back to the temple and see if I can get an idea of a more typical. But you never know. I will try to go back there for they have a Christmas concert every year, and that's the second time I went in. They also have an art exhibit that's up year round that I let a couple of missionaries show me the art. You never know what interesting things you're going to find to do. So that's all I'm currently reading, and I'll talk more about this maybe next time. But I might have already gotten rid of the book, Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust, which is not, as I thought, short stories. It's humble tales, in these humble tales we are carried beyond horror and reasons. Okay, that's not very, but essentially derived by the author from interviews and oral histories. These are very, very short episodes surrounding the Jewish experience, perhaps specifically the Hasidic Jewish experience with the Holocaust. They're very short episodes. They're not short stories. They are, but they're true, or they're based on mystical mysticism experiences at the time. So I will write a blog post about this. I will maybe talk about it at the other thing, but I wanted to make sure to mention it. And now I'm probably past a half hour. Yes, 30 minutes and 44 seconds. I think I'll just say goodbye then. But subscribe and look for my onstage blog thing about Animorphs, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram and all this. All the links are down below. It was recently my brother's birthday, and there's a video of him at the Netsky Cats YouTube page wearing one of his cats like a scarf. The cat's alive, and he wouldn't wear a cat fur scarf, but it's just a cute thing. And yeah, so how do I? Okay. I think I've caught my breath from the long 40-block walk home from Temple. Ram the Blade Ship. Nickelodeon and Netflix. Ram the Blade Ship.